Hello and welcome. I am Humphrey Hawksley. This is Care Vision's professional talk and podcast, where we discuss issues on health and social care that are critical to all our lives. The professional bit refers to specialisms and peer groups. The talk bit is a prompt about communicating with each other, how professionals talk among themselves and to civilians like myself, hopefully in a language that we understand. Today, we're continuing this critical theme of trauma, how it impacts a child's behaviour and how best families and professionals can help. I'm lucky to have as my guest the co-author of the great book on this, A Guide to Therapeutic Child Care, What You Need to Know to Create a Healing Home, from which we're going to talk about a range of issues: food, touching, communication, pain-based behaviour, stories, and more. One of the co-authors is Laura Steckley, who was my first guest on this show. The other co-author is Autumn Roche-Marsh. And the third co-author, welcome Ruth Emond to Care Vision's Professional Talk.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
It's great to have you here. I like to do this at the beginning of our shows because we've got time to unfold things gradually. Ruth, how did you get into this line of work? Was it something personal? Were you academically curious?
Yeah, I think I've had a bit of a long journey. Maybe that's about being the age I am as well. But I went after school to study social work, probably a bit naively, not really understanding, I don't think, what social work was. And I had a real wobble in the middle of my course and thought, this is not something I can do, and I'm not able for it. And I was just about to start a placement in a residential children's home. And I went to see my tutor the day before and was in floods of tears and thinking, no, I need to throw in my towel. I can't do this. And he recommended that I just go for the day and see how I got on. So I went for the day and had the tour and had the conversation with the manager, and again was in floods of tears and said, no, I can't do this. So he said, well, go home, see how you feel, and if you want to come back tomorrow, come back tomorrow. So I went back the next day, and I was there for the next 3.5 months, and it was completely life-changing. I had an experience, I think, of being part of a community and part of a collective shared experience that really changed me. I think changed my view of the world, changed my understanding of, I think, the potential that relationships have to make change, and gave me, I suppose, an opportunity to understand that residential care, I think in particular, when it's done well, isn't just benefiting and helping children and young people grow, it's also helping adults change and grow, and that's actually a sign of a really good residential house, is that we are changed by it. So I had that amazing experience, and then kind of went back, completed my course, and then went back there to work. And I worked there for a few years and then stayed in the residential sector for the next kind of 10 years.
Oh, can I go back to the wobble?
Yes.
What made you wobble?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I was quite young. I think I was like 19 and a half. I mean, I look back and think, wow, I was not a lot older than quite a lot of the young people that I was working with. So I think I had a lot of doubt about, was I capable of doing the job? Could I be useful? Could I be helpful? And also I think I felt a bit overwhelmed by the enormity that I saw of the problem, and I suppose the focus on the really difficult experiences that I knew these young people would have had. But I think what happened when I actually spent time there was just the delight of meeting whole children, whole young people, not just the part of them that had been hurt or
So the wobble was a 19-year-old lack of confidence?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think a lack of confidence and a lack of I think you've got to sort of be willing to step into a role and step into a space. And a lot of the time, I think what young people and children need is a sense of adults who are robust and who have space for them emotionally, physically, psychologically, and an availability. And I suppose I definitely had doubt about whether I could offer that, whether I was actually solid enough to do that.
What was it about, and it might have been a mix of this, whether you would let down the children that you were meant to be looking after, or whether you would yourself fail and feel bad about that?
I think there was definitely a concern about letting the children down. It felt like quite a powerful position to have been given.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, probably there was bits of worries about failing. I think but the
But you,
desire to run away was quite strong, Humphrey.
I think we've all had that. But the key thing is that you had chosen the social work or this line of work
Mm.
instinctively, if that's the right word, as opposed to starting on a Tesco checkout and ending up as the managing director of Tesco's.
Well, I think I've always been really interested in people and interested in stories, and I really enjoy experiences that I feel I learn from, and I think that's been a constant all the way through my working life. But I definitely hadn't anticipated. I suppose I had viewed this kind of job as this is something I do with and for someone. But actually, I came out of that experience thinking, actually, this is something which affects me and changes me. Um,
And
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 yeah,
and I can ask you to give me a headline answer to this question, and then we're going to
sure,
move on to the nitty
sure.
gritty of the thing.
Yep.
Is now all these years later, how would you say it's changed you?
Ooh, a word line. I could do 45 minutes just on that, Humphrey.
Well,
How has it
we don't have
changed me?
that,
No,
unfortunately.
no. It's changed me. I think I am constantly amazed by what people cope with and amazed by people's willingness to 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 let me in, to let me be alongside them. And I think that has changed me in a way, I suppose, that I have a real belief in potential and a belief in humanity that probably has become more and more consolidated, I think.
And
Um,
you're a more confident person now. I can tell that by the way you're answering my questions.
yeah, I think, probably much more than it was when I was 19. But then in another way, I, it's funny, I was talking about this to somebody recently that I think my peak confidence was probably in my late 20s. And I think then you get, maybe as you get older too, you start to think, God, there's so many things I really don't know and I'm really unsure about. And so maybe I'm back at kind of uncertainty. Yeah.
Now we're gonna move on to the professional side of this. But now that Ruth has opened herself up to our audience, you can open yourselves up to Ruth. And as we go through this, ask any question you want, put it in the chat, ask about her job, challenge her answers. And if you use acronyms that we don't understand, I'll come back and ask for a translation. But to begin with, we've talked about trauma, we're talking about therapeutic care. Just define that for us.
I guess talking of journeys, I think I've been on a bit of a journey with my understanding of therapeutic care as well. I think where I am increasingly now is at a point where I think really good therapeutic care is care where adults are supported and contained, and that allows them then to maintain an empathy and an understanding of children who are having difficulties, and that they can understand and embrace the sort of impact of the moment-to-moment everyday experiences that we offer children. So for me, therapeutic care is the sort of active use of those very everyday sort of experiences, but thinking all the time about the opportunities they present to help children heal, to help children make sense of the experiences they've had, and to help children to feel a sense of hope and hopefulness. So I think for that to happen, adults need to be well looked after in order to keep that space within themselves available to children.
This is looking after the care teams as well as the children or young adults that you're caring for. Now, I don't know whether it's the same in Scotland, but I think here you have something called a multidisciplinary team. So you have somebody there and they have different experts that are put in, as you might have a physiotherapist, you might have a psychologist, a behavioral specialist, a speech and language therapist, or whatever. But therapeutic care meshes all that together, does it? And it just explain how that happens in the care plan.
Yeah, so I guess what we're talking about here is residential environments that are for children who've not been safe at home. And so a big part of the job of residential care is to use the group, to use each other, to use the team around the children, to use the environment. So the whole systemic kind of all-encompassing everydayness of that child's immediate world. But I think for that to be effective, children are bringing into that space often a lot of hurt and a lot of fear, and sometimes a lack of trust in adults. So for adults to be around that and to be effective in that, I think they need to be really well supported and really well cared for. So I think that increasingly, I think that really good residential care feels very everyday, feels very ordinary, but actually is so skilled because it's offering the ordinary to children who the ordinary is very new for. The predictable, the routine, the rhythm is very new to them. So,
Give us a pen picture of a child that has come from a home that doesn't work and comes to a residential placement. What happens? Just give us that, in your view, how that works.
a difficult question, that, Humphrey, because I think fear and hurt and loss can manifest itself in lots of different ways. So I think sometimes children and young people can come to residential care having moved through lots of different other places, through maybe kinship relationships, through foster care. So often when they arrive at residential care, it hasn't felt particularly like a positive for them. They might have a big feeling of having failed, not being able to do well in these other places where they've lived. I would imagine that for lots of young people there is a mistrust that this is going to be any different than all the places that they've been before. And sometimes maybe a bit of resistance of relationships, because relationships can be quite hurtful and can be damaging. But it's really difficult to sort of, because I think there's also a danger of kind of stereotyping, like this is the child in care. And I think I think, I think children in care are as diverse as children who aren't in care. You know, they're all so different, and that's part of the absolute joy of the job is to really get to know who that individual child is, all of them. Yeah.
And what age group, or what is the youngest sort of, I mean, one of the things you said there that caught me was that they would have gone through several stages. I mean, presumably sort of help at home and then fostering and then something. So they would be fairly sort of experienced in being moved around.
I think potentially, yeah. I think the demographic of children in residential care is changing. So I think there was certainly when I first started working in residential care, it was predominantly kind of teenagers, sort of 12 to sort of 16 was the kind of main age group. But I think increasingly there's a much younger demographic. Equally, at the other end of the scale, with the very positive changes in legislation, I think there's also some young people who choose to stay on for a bit longer, which I think is fantastic. But it sometimes means that there's quite a big span of ages.
Yeah.
I think the other big change in my working life is that residential care settings now tend to be much smaller. So when I started my first job, there was between 10 and 12 children in the house, and that would be really unusual now.
Oh, really?
So it's much more likely to be small sort of group homes. Yeah.
The reason I asked the age thing is because I think the first, after the introduction of your book, the first headline you have is called The Developing Person. I'm not going to go into more of the elements that you've got there, but what did you mean? But why did you start off by that? What are you saying?
I suppose for us, I guess why we started there was we wanted to sort of present the story of children not just as children who've experienced trauma, but children. And our argument was that it's really helpful for people to be familiar with developmental kind of theory, sort of ideas around sort of normal development, partly because that can help us to think about what we should be expecting at particular stages of development. I think that is important because sometimes children's behaviour gets completely pathologized. So what is actually very normal responses to difficult experiences, or actually just normal developmental responses, when adults have an idea that children have come from a trauma background, sometimes everything they do gets kind of put through that filter and through that lens. So that's one reason. And the other reason, I suppose, is that developmental theory helps us to understand what kind of optimal conditions for growth might be. You know, so if you think about, I think in the book we talk about like growing a plant, like, you know, to be able to understand what a child needs to thrive and how that changes through childhood. You need different things at different times. We just thought that was a useful beginning.
Well, yes, because I mean, what you just said, you call it the developing person, stressing that you're not really talking about the developing traumatized person. You want the trauma to be taken away from that so that you can look at the individual.
Yeah, and I suppose it's thinking then about understanding the difficult experiences in the context of development. So understanding when these difficult times happened can help deepen our understanding of how those difficult experiences have translated into the child that's in front of you.
And you have a section in that chapter called "What Threatens Development." What does threaten development?
What does threaten development? Yeah, I think primarily where you don't have consistent, available, reliable adults. You know, so much of certainly early childhood and infancy, if you take a developmental perspective, relies on consistency of adults. And it can be really difficult to move through life when those sort of foundational bits have been more challenging. But that's not to say, I mean, I guess the other bit in this is that children and people, human beings, are just incredibly adaptive. So people find ways to cope with what's around, and sometimes those ways of coping serve them really, really well. And sometimes those ways of coping are the things that in residential care we're helping children with, to try and find different ways of coping, because sometimes those ways of coping are actually getting in the way of them doing well in school or having friendships but I think if you understand it sometimes as a means of coping, then it can help you kind of have a different type of respect for a behaviour.
So one of the key things there is the familiarity of the people around you that you mentioned. So a lot of that's to do with staff retention then, the way the residential home is managed and the way that they can keep the staff.
I mean, ideally, I think that comes back to that idea of, like, if you can care for the adults, you're much more likely to then be able to care for the children, because adults want to stay in places where they feel cared for and looked after. So I think all of that can only benefit children.
That's a message to the managers of these homes. And the other thing I just query I've got there is the adaptability to cope. If you're a child with that comes from a traumatic background, you've been sort of coping all the time in trying to survive. Do you sort of does that fill up and you can't cope anymore because it's full, or do you become even more adaptable?
Again, I don't know that there's a straight answer to that question. There's probably lots of children who just find different ways to cope.
Yeah.
But I think coping can look really challenging to the outside world. I think ways of managing. But actually, when I think back to, like, over my career, sometimes the children that I've worried about the most are the ones whose ways of coping are actually very quiet, and where I think sometimes they're the children that can get a bit lost. They're a bit invisible, and their way of coping is to become invisible.
You can press it and they get into your shell.
And to become invisible to people around. So I think being vigilant to all different ways of managing, and that includes how adults adapt and manage too. Like, we've all found ways to cope and manage, and again, in residential care, that's all exposed. It's not like a normal job where you get a lunch hour, or you can knock off early. You're in public for the whole time you're there. So it's a space, I think, that can be really challenging for everyone. For that reason.
There's that sort of holistic thing that. Now, if anybody in the audience disagrees or agrees or has a story that comes out of the section that we just discussed with Ruth, put it in the chat. That's about the developing person. The next section you have is called Tuning In and Attunement. What is that?
Well, I guess attunement comes from developmental theory, early developmental theory, and it's the idea of how a parent or carer recognises and responds to the infant.
Right.
So a parent knowing, oh, my baby's uncomfortable, I need to pick my baby up, I need to hold my baby, I need to feed my baby, that you're tuning in to those experiences. And I guess in successful sort of relationships, for want of a better term, you build a capacity then to feel attuned to So I am important and I'm worth being tuned into. But it also equips you then with abilities to tune into others. So so I think that experience of really being noticed and attended to, and I guess when we tune in below a surface behaviour. So, if a baby's crying, we're not really thinking, oh, that baby's being naughty. We're tuning in to what's underneath that, what's driving that behaviour. And I guess children want to experience that all through childhood, that the adults around them understand and notice and pay attention to what's underneath and what's,
Right.
yeah.
So can I ask you a completely impossible question? And I know it's impossible. It's coming from a layman here. If a child arrives at the residential home, how long would it take you to tune into them, to actually, is it a day, a week? I mean, before they feel that sort of
Well, that's
relationship that you
two.
just mentioned?
Yeah, I think they can be almost two different but connected things. So I suppose a good worker would be noticing and thinking, being curious about what's happening for that child or that young person. I think sometimes children can experience it immediately, like a feeling of being noticed. For some children, that's comforting. For others, it's really scary to feel like, well, how
Yeah.
you're like a mind reader. How do you know that? How do you know that I think and feel that? That's freaking me out, because that could be quite a new experience. So I think we have to be mindful of
It's-
what that
and,
feels like.
and you've got to detect that, haven't you? If it's acceptance or if it's suspicion.
Yeah. I mean, there's this idea, I suppose, of the dance of attunement that, you get into sync with each other. So it's not like one person tuning into the other, but you're actually in connection. But I think sometimes that state of a dance, that state of deep connection can be momentary, it can be just fleeting. And for others, it can be a much more sustained experience.
Okay. Yes.
I think, I
And
think the key is to be aware and to be vigilant of how am I feeling and how do I think that child's feeling and what's
yeah.
that about, so to be attending to that and paying attention to that.
We have a question from
Yeah.
Phil Cody. I think it might be three questions. I'm just going to read it out. How do you think we should try to balance and prioritize different aspects of care, including one, positive everyday experiences and relationships; two, care workers and others paying attention to past difficulties and their impacts in their work with young people; and three, formal therapeutic interventions carried out in clinical or psychotherapeutic settings. How should you balance and prioritize those three aspects? Phew.
Well, that's a great question,
That's
Phil.
even more
Thank you.
difficult than my questions, isn't it? So
Yeah,
off you
yeah.
go, Ruth.
No, I think that's a great question. And it's a really pertinent one for me because I work in a therapeutic context as a therapist. So I now am a person where children come out for their hour of therapy and then go back in to their everyday world. So it's a question that I tussle with a lot. I think the first 2 points about everyday experiences and care workers having a good understanding of past difficulties, to me, they are completely interconnected.
Okay.
So for me, I think, how do we keep at the sort of forefront the need to ensure that everyday experiences are restorative? And that can be from a tiny thing like making someone a cup of tea and knowing what they have in their tea and how they like it. Like that just tiny experience of, I know you, you matter to me, I'm paying attention to you. That on the surface, that's really taken for granted everyday thing, but I think can be deeply connected to past difficulties. So I suppose for me, it's how do we support people who are providing the care to be mindful of that, because I don't think it then takes away from the kind of whole child. I think it's just about giving value to the everyday. I think sometimes unless you've worked in residential care, I think sometimes people don't on the outside recognise just how transformative that drip, drip, drip experience that is kind and loving and responsive and attuned and predictable and reliable can be for people, and how complicated and difficult that is to provide when you're living alongside children that have had such difficult times. It's a really hard job, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
So you put the first two together. I understand that completely as a sort of holistic thing. And then you've got the third one, the formal therapeutic interventions carried out in clinical psychotherapeutic settings. So that's sort of like the specialist coming in, going to see a consultant or something. So that is a lesser priority, or how does that rank?
I think that varies depending on the child and depending on where they are. So for some children, they want to actively and consciously revisit and rework experiences that they've had and make sense of them in quite a sort of concrete way. That's not for every child, and I think the timing of that is really important. Personally, I think it's important that children have a sense of control and choice over that kind of intervention. I think it works much better when children feel they've chosen to do that kind of work. I think it only works when the other 23 hours, as they refer to, are predictable and loving and supportive.
Okay.
The therapy, and I speak as a therapist, in and of itself can only do so much. And therapy will only be effective if children feel safe enough to be vulnerable and to unravel a bit. So they need to feel that sense of containment in the outside world to be able to really do that work.
That's a very clear answer. So 1 and 2 are as one, and that's the priority. And number 3, yes, but only once 1 and 2 are in place. Jill Muir says we use, and we've gone into capital letters here. So do you know what she's talking about? Pace, playful, accepting, curious, and empathy with children.
Yeah. Is there a question? Sorry, Humphrey.
It's a statement, I think, isn't it, Jill?
Yeah.
But is it I'm not sure whether this is a particular sort of psychological a system or whether it's the words.
Yeah, so it comes from the work of Dan Hughes and others, and I guess it's just an approach to be thinking about how you get alongside and make relationships with children. And I think that idea of being playful and curious is really important, like to be able to think about the fun of children. And again, I think that's the joy of the work, and to have empathy. So yeah, I think it's a really nice.
It's a good.
Really...
Jill says yes. I was sharing approaches that I use. Thank you, Jill. If you can just put it, let us know where you work or something like that. That could fill out your contribution there, which is I think is really useful because it's sort of filling it out a bit. Whilst we wait for Jill to get back to us on that, your next section, which is clear, healing and containing. Yeah. What are you healing and what are you containing?
So again, I suppose the chapter is really referring to psychological, emotional containment. So drawing on the work of Bion, and again thinking developmentally that attuned parents, responsive, predictable parents, part of what they do for very small children is that they take on and accept the feelings that the child has, and they kind of hold them, process them a bit, and kind of give them back to their child in a way that is manageable, so children don't then feel completely overwhelmed. And so that's a very normal kind of developmental activity. Sometimes, I guess, in residential settings, the feelings that need to be contained can feel much bigger and can feel much harder to manage for the child on their own. But also, children might not have had lots of opportunities to have been helped to know how to contain and manage big feelings. So again, it might be a relatively new experience to have adults who can help them with that.
Right.
I
So
guess
just
the other thing, sorry, I just want to say that, you know, I think with a sort of understanding of that, there's a sort of danger that, well, a term I've heard a lot recently is this idea of being regulated, emotionally regulated, and children being dysregulated. And I guess, again, that's, you know, comes from kind of psychological theory, and it's useful, but the danger of that is that it suggests that people never get dysregulated, and dysregulation's like a really normal thing that happens. So I was quite dysregulated before coming on this call because I was nervous and I was trying to get everyone's tea ready and make the dog not bark. So dysregulation is a kind of normal response, but I suppose it's about how we then calm and settle and come back to earth. And so sometimes with children that we're working with and adults that we're working with, that time it takes to go from dysregulation to regulation, it can be much greater. But we all need help. We all need other people to help us with that. So again, I think that's a really normal developmental experience that, you know, we need someone else to say, you're okay, I've got you, it's okay. These are kind of normal responses.
And I just want to go back to something you said at the beginning about that, is that is sort of understanding what the child wants, and these are natural parental instincts, are they? And the children that you get into residential are ones that have not had that from their parents. Other things have gone wrong, but essentially they haven't had that. Is that?
Or may not have had that, you know, may not have had that. I think it's difficult to sort of make a huge generalization, but I definitely think that's something that would be common to pay attention to. Like, how has a child been helped to understand and make sense of big feelings, and to find ways of letting people know how they feel that aren't causing damage to themselves or other people, you know, that are kind of healthy ways of expressing.
If they come to you at, say, 8 or 10 or you know, at an age like that, they would have never have had that empathy from a parent. So it's a completely new environment that they walk into.
Potentially. I think what's more common, in my experience anyway, I can only speak from my experience in relation to this point, but I think what's more common is an inconsistency, which sometimes can be more difficult. So sometimes I've got a parent who really is tuned into me and who I feel I've really got, and then other times they're just not as available emotionally or physically. And I think that can be really tricky for children and really muddly. And that's why it's so important for residential workers and foster carers to be really consistent in how they are. And that doesn't mean being robotic. But the core of them, the idea of being present and available, that, I guess, that's what you're aiming for. But also within that, when that goes wrong, which it inevitably does, because no one can be brilliant all the time, that there's a sort of acknowledgement and a expression of that to children to help them make sense of it. So Yeah.
And the phrases that you came out, they sort of sent a little shiver down my spine. Regulatory and deregulatory. Who on earth
Yeah.
came up with that? It sounds dreadful. Is it one thing?
Dysregulation and regulation. Well, it's just a psychological
When you're dealing with
term.
moods and minds and high emotions, to think of regulation and deregulation, is that
Dysregulation. Yeah, I think it's just like from developmental psychology, just thinking about how human beings feel and express and emote and manage their bodies, because we feel things in our bodies. It's not a thinking thing, particularly when we're really little. It's
yeah,
not a brain. It's not a cognitive sort
yeah,
of conscious thing. It's often an unconscious, body filling, body changing
yeah,
thing that we're experiencing, and as adults, then we want to help children through that and with that, but we also need that as adults. And I suppose that comes back to that bit about how do we help adults feel contained and
yes.
supported and made sense of, because they're
And,
much more able then to offer that to children.
and being contained is when you're regulated, is it? And if you're
Yeah,
not contained, you're
containment, to me, is sort of emotional, psychological holding.
okay.
That you're kind of holding and then giving back in a way
Yeah,
that's more tolerable.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad we got that one done, because we're moving on to the next one now, which is
Yeah.
rhythms, routines, and rituals.
Yeah.
Um, yes, is that a good thing? They're good things or bad things?
They're great things.
Okay.
Yeah, I think human beings are rhythmic beings. We're used to the sun going up and the sun going down. There's so much tides going in and out. I think there's so much about who we are that relies on rhythms. But again, I suppose the developmental kind of research would say that children flourish in environments that are predictable, and that's not environments that are regimented,
Right.
but are just gently predictable. So
Okay.
I kind of get up in the morning and I can anticipate the mood of the house. I can anticipate that I'm going to have food. I can anticipate that I'm going to get help to get to school. That these things become routine, and therefore taken for granted. And that's the ideal for children. They can just take that for granted, that that's going to be available. I think ritual is a really interesting one. That I guess ritual's full of symbolism, and it's about establishing little practices that are filled with unspoken meaning. So,
Okay.
whether that is, at
Give me an
supper.
example.
Well, I'm just thinking, like the place that I went to when I was on placement and then went back to work. We had a real kind of tea and toast sort of ritual. That was just the ritual. We would all have that around kind of 8 o'clock. Everyone would just sort of gather. You didn't have to come for it. You didn't have to, but it was there. And the ritual of sharing that together, the rules were sort of loosened off a bit,
Yeah.
that maybe might be around for other things. And there was a sort of symbolism in that activity. Everybody made the stuff together and sat
Yeah.
together, and
And,
yeah.
and all of that is a sort of anchor of stability, really, isn't it? In life, and also you can feel free to express your emotions and your feelings when you're doing those things.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
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 I think so. And I think that's the other kind of really interesting thing when you bring a group of people together, adults and children, who potentially have come from all different types of backgrounds and not grown up together. How do you establish kind of ritual? How do you establish routine? Because often rituals in families, they're even passed down generationally,
Yes.
like how people do Christmas, or
Yeah.
what Sunday lunch is like, whatever. But when you bring lots of people together, People have different expectations of what normal is and what a routine is and so I think there's something about how that gets established, but also the importance of there being flexibility within that, because as you know, new children come to live as part of the house, then the house should change. You know, if children are having to be squashed in to fit what the house wants.
Yeah, it needs to be flexible to expand.
Yeah, it should be dynamic. It should be changing. And often when you look at sort of rhythms or rules or rituals, they can be established and fixed. So no matter who's there, it's always done like this. And I think sometimes having a bit of flexibility around that. And the thing about rhythms and sort of rules is that when those are broken, it's just really good fun. Do you know, whether that's in a small way, like we have pizza on our knees on a Friday night, or do you know what? Let's not have tea and toast tonight. Let's all just jump in the car and go and get, I don't know, a Starbucks or whatever. It feels absolutely brilliant. But you have to have that sort of taken for granted, it's always like this feeling, to be able to break free of that sometimes, and they're often like the most fun times.
And we have Jill Muir has come back to us. Thank you, Jill. Jill asked the question about playful accepting. I'm a family support worker with an intensive support team in Angus called AIST. This is a new team. We aim to provide support to families with 12 to 18-year-olds who are at risk of entering the care system. So, Jill, you're the sort of paper wall, I don't know what you call it, to try to prevent them going into residential care. Am I reading that right, Ruth? Yes, I'm reading it right. Thank you for telling us that, Jill, because that was one of the sort of things that we came on. We are rushing through time. We've got to be very quick now. Memory keepers, a child's story. Tell us about that.
Well, I suppose that's my particular sort of passion, interest. I think it's really interesting how adults often try to protect children from information, and then children find stuff out when they're much older and can feel very let down and hurt that they weren't helped to know that. So I'm really interested in how we help children know their stories as they're growing, as they're developing, so that a care record, a written record is there, but you don't need to rely on it to know who you are and how things have come to be the way they are.
What would be an example? Sorry, what would be an example of that? Like, is somebody who's been to prison or a divorce or something?
Yeah, like children, finding out maybe that, I don't know, like there's a parent didn't actually work on a cruise ship, they were in prison. Like that. That's really important that I think people grow up with, are helped, families are helped to be able to tell a story. I think the other thing is that part of our job, when we're not part of the family, where we are responsible for the day-to-day care of the child but not part of the family, is that we also need to be really clear with children that different people have different points of view about what's happened. So again, I think sometimes single stories can be told to children as this is what happened and this is the truth, but actually there's different versions of events, and being able to help children know and understand that. But most importantly, I think if we are in direct care of children, then we have got a responsibility to think about how we hold on to the everyday kind of memories that are created for children. So care records are not brilliant places for people to learn about what everyday life was like for them as children. So
I mean, you have your care record, and then you have, say, your journaling, where they...
Well, ideally you want somebody who, like a parent, is holding on to your gymnastics certificate and I don't know, your school tie and the picture you drew for them, the little note you left for them. All of these kind of material objects, I think they hold such symbolic meaning and are so important to our sense of who we are. And I think the very fact that they're held on to for us is so powerful and so meaningful, that somebody has cared enough about us to be able to hold on to these things for us. When we are privileged enough to be in a child's life for that moment in time, I think it is really important that we're not just thinking about what needs to be captured for a legal process or an organisational reason, but actually to think about what might be of interest to the child now and as an adult, and how do we look after that? How do we hold on to memories and information?
Well, I think that's a lovely thought, but I'm going to move us on because the food and its everyday use. We're going to go from story keeping to food. Where does that fit in?
Oh, well, again, I suppose thinking about food as a sort of an everyday activity, in some ways it covers lots of the things that we've talked about. So often food has a ritual kind of component to it, like how do we celebrate birthdays or how do we recognise someone's achievement, like if they've done really well in their exams, do we go out for our tea or do we buy them a cake? And sometimes food is really part of that. But I think for me, there's something about how really deeply knowing someone's preferences and likes and dislikes around food, it's again just a such a tangible, practical way of saying I know you and I pay attention to you and you matter to me.
Yeah.
I think food is also sensory, so it can hold lots of complicated feelings and memories for children. And again, just being vigilant to that.
So it's really, I mean, it's the two things that we've just talked about, the story keeping and the food. This is to let the person know that you care about them.
Yeah, I think, and also I think food is a brilliant form of expression as well. Like people can, I'm just thinking about baking. The meaning of baking, it's vast. So for some children, it's just a sensory experience. They don't care what the cake turns out like. They've just liked the mixing. For others, it's really important that they learn a skill and they want you to teach them. And then for others, it might be actually the outcome really matters because I'm baking this cake for my mum who's coming to visit. And for us as adults, then talk about that idea of attunement, like we need to tune into what actually matters to the child. So sometimes as adults we can get caught up in, well, don't muck about with that and make a mess of it. It's all about the output. So I think there's definitely something about how we tune into the meaning that the children are given to the food practice that they're involved in at any point in time.
Cheryl says scrapbooking is a good tool for children to keep memorabilia. Yes, I had a scrapbook when I was a child, and I think I've probably still got it somewhere. Touch introduction. What is the importance of touch?
Yeah, well, I think touch is, again, a sort of fundamental part of what it is to be human. And again, so much of how we are with one another relies on connection, physical connection. For some of the children that we look after, their experience of touch has not been good, has not been comfortable, has not been potentially consensual, and has sometimes been harmful. So thinking about how we model touch with one another as adults, how we negotiate touch with children, so whether that's about trying to find opportunities for sort of sensory, nice kind of rhythmic things like hair brushing or hand lotion on hands. But I think touch has this huge kind of deep connection that goes past words. In some care settings, it's also complicated by restraint and having to physically hold children to keep everybody safe.
Yeah.
So again, there's some situations where some researchers would suggest that sometimes children seek out touch through those mechanisms. And can we help children find other ways of experiencing physical connection and physical closeness?
And of course, at the beginning with touch, that might be a traumatic experience for them if they've come from, say, an abusive family where they've been beaten up and that sort of thing.
It can be, yeah, it can be, but I think there's something too about, again, just, I suppose, coming back to that idea of what do people need to grow, and what do people need to be able to see other people doing in order to learn different ways of coping and managing. So I think what we model as adults around touch and how we negotiate touch with children is hugely important. That we don't assume that it's okay to just touch children, but equally that we can't touch children, that somehow that's seen as something to be avoided.
I mean, that is, yes, you've got to be very careful. And the last one I'm going to throw at you, because we haven't been able to cover well, a few, is working with pain-based behaviour. Where does the pain come from? What is the behaviour?
So, I mean, again, it's quite hard to do this in just very short
I know,
answers.
it's horrible, isn't it?
It's horrible.
Regulated or deregulated?
Yeah. I suppose what we were thinking about there was trying to think, again, coming back to the idea of attunement, what might be being communicated by behaviour, and how do we help contain behaviour in a way that has empathy and consistency and safety. So there's boundaries, there's clear boundaries, but that wherever possible they're free from kind of shaming, and they're not experienced as, or they're not delivered punitively. But I think there's something about trying to understand what might be communicated through different behaviours and to look underneath that.
And the pain you referred to there is the psychological pain or the trauma. It's not like if they've got a hurt elbow or something. And I mean, give us an example of what a behaviour might be against what's bottled inside.
Oh God. I mean, again, it's really difficult to just give a sort of trite, I don't want to be trite in my response. I mean, I guess even just things like, sort of behaviour that's about lashing out at somebody or really getting angry and swearing and shouting, and, it could be a whole host of things. It could be the child that we were talking about earlier that makes themselves invisible, that disappears in front of us all. I think the idea behind that is to notice the behaviour, to notice what's being done, but to think about our response in relation to what might be behind that, to what might be the child might be attempting to communicate through that behaviour, and that's what we're responding to. Rather than just the sort of superficial behaviour on the surface.
We are at times wing charities attacking us, but can you just? I mean, we've had a fantastic conversation. We've gone through all this sort of stuff. Give me a final thought, something that we can all go away with and talk about over the water cooler, because it really has been.
I mean, I guess for me, I suppose where I'm at, and I feel like I'm learning all the time and tussling with so much of this all the time, is that I'm really trying to hold on to the idea of not thinking about what's the problem, but thinking like, where's the child, and to not lose sight of the whole child, and to not lose sight of the enjoyment and the fun and I don't know, the sort of the sense of connection and the hope for relationships that can happen, like the joy of working with children. It's incredibly difficult work, but I think it's also, certainly residential work, it's the most privileged role I've ever had, to be able to wake somebody up in the morning and put somebody to bed at night and tuck them in and read them a story and see them on their best moment and their absolute worst moment. I think that's a total privilege, and I think celebrating that is important.
Thank you. Just to see your, I think, passion there, from the 19-year-old with the wobble to to where you are now. Thank you so much, Ruth. I just want to say to our audience, our next Care Vision Professional Talk is at 7 p.m. on Thursday, the 25th. Yes, that's right, with Steve Carnaby. He's a clinical psychologist and specialist, but dealing in special needs, learning difficulties, behavior, and physical challenges, which will be fascinating. But I just want to say, Ruth, you have been patient, brilliant, and really, really, really colourful and interesting to talk to. So I'd like to thank you.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. I feel like I've waffled, so apologies to everyone. Thanks so much.
No, you have not waffled. If you were waffling, I would have cut in, but it was absolutely compelling. And thank you, Jill. Thank you, everybody, for your comments and questions. And until Steve Carnaby on the 25th, for now, everyone, stay safe and goodbye. And thank you again, Ruth.